Okay, we're going to move quickly now through Acts 5, scene 6 to the end, which is scene 9. These are really short scenes, so we'll just tackle them all together. So have a read through this slide. And this is one of the shortest scenes of the entire play. It only has about 10 lines. And the primary purpose of this scene is to really fulfill the prophecy of the apparitions that Macbeth will not be defeated till Birnam Wood moves towards Dunsinane. So it allows the audience to have a picture of the advancing forces. At this point, the audience is aware that it's only a matter of time before Macbeth's reign collapses altogether. The scene also reveals Malcolm's army's tactics and order. He has a planned attack so that his worthy uncle Siward kind of leads the initial forces, and then they come in after that with Macduff and Malcolm guiding those troops. I want you just to have a look at Malcolm's language. The two lines that are worth commenting on. First, Malcolm announces that Siward, his worthy uncle, shall lead the first battle, while Macduff and he complete the encounter according to our order. So the phrasing of this, with the implication that Siward is to be kind of revered for his age and experience, kind of establishes a really strong idea of the propriety and the orderliness of Malcolm's army. And if you contrast that and you compare it to the kind of lawlessness and lovelessness of Macbeth's regime, there is a real kind of difference there. In Act 1, Scene 4, Duncan tells Macbeth, or calls Macbeth, his worthiest cousin, and now Malcolm calls Macduff worthy Macduff. And I want you to think about the kind of cyclical nature of war and of tyranny and of revenge. And as I've said to you before, you can talk about specific productions. I know I haven't had a chance to show you this particular production, but Roman Polanski's 1971 production at the end of the movie shows Macduff going to seek out the witches, suggesting that man's desire for power can corrupt even the most noble of men, and that this cycle of violence is going to continue. So we're looking at Act 5, Scene 6. We're near Macbeth's castle at Dunsinane. Enter Malcolm, Siward, Macduff and their army, including a drummer and trumpeters. Some soldiers bear colours, most hold boughs, the boughs of the tree. So, Malcolm. Now near enough, your leafy screens throw down, and show like those you are. You, worthy uncle, shall with my cousins, your right noble son, lead our first battle. Worthy Macduff and we shall take upon what else remains to do, according to our order. So Malcolm's use of imperatives, he's giving order just like a king, a leader. We can see him becoming that leader. The use of adjectives worthy and noble are a reminder that he is very much on the good side, but also reminds us of how Duncan was speaking about Macbeth at the beginning. Siward, fare you well. Do we but find the tyrant's power tonight, let us be beaten if we cannot fight. So here the tyrant's power is, let's find the tyrant's army and let us be beaten if we cannot fight. So Siward says he isn't afraid of fighting and or to die fighting. So it isn't worth living in a world with Macbeth as king. Macduff says, make all our trumpets speak, give them all breath, those clamours harbingers of blood and death. So this is a real juxtaposition of life being represented by the breath and death. So the trumpets that signal the death of Macbeth are brought to life. So have a read through this slide. I think essentially, Scene 7 paves the way for Macbeth's destruction. There's a kind of flurry of activity and action that happens, and it's evident that Macbeth's fall is closer than ever. It's the first scene that Macbeth and Macduff are together since Act 2, Scene 3, very early on in the play, so you know that their battle is imminent. Okay, Act 5, Scene 7. We're in another part of a battlefield. Enter Macbeth. They have tied me to a stake, I cannot fly, but bear-like I must fight the course. What's he that was not born of woman? Such a one I am to fear, or none. So this reference to bear-like is a reference to one of the most popular pastimes, which was bear baiting. Many of the crowds at the Globe were also patrons of the nearby bear gardens, where bears, dogs, bulls, chimps, and other creatures routinely fought to the death in front of roaring crowds. Animal blood sports were among the most beloved pastimes in the 16th and 17th century in England. So this particular reference, bear-like, means a bear would be led into a pit and chained to a stake by its leg or neck, and people placed bets, and then a pack of dogs, usually bulldogs or mastiffs, would be unleashed to attack the bear. The fight was usually stopped after several dogs died or the bear was bitten into submission. Because bears had to be imported at great cost, they were usually stopped just before the bear died. Queen Elizabeth herself enjoyed the shows, and King James I was a big fan of the sport, and he hosted private shows in his court involving polar bears and lions borrowed from the Tower of London's menagerie. So when he says bear-like there, he's talking about the reference to the blood sport. When he says, "Such a one am I to fear or none," despite calling the equivocating fiends, Macbeth still clings to the prophecies to save him. So even though he has just said that he's going to be suspicious and doubt what they've said, here we can see that actually he's still clinging to that hope. Enter young Siward. So this is the soldier, Malcolm's uncle Siward. This is his son. "What is thy name? Thou shalt be afraid to hear it." "No, though thou call'st thyself a hotter name than any is in hell. My name is Macbeth." Now, young Siward, probably shows that really Macbeth hasn't learned his lesson after the first prophecy came true. He's still very arrogant, and he comes across as though he's still invincible. And so when Macbeth kills young Siward, his death shows how far Macbeth has fallen from this brave war hero and slaying traitors to now killing young boys. And here's one of the unrough youths that would have been mentioned in Act 5, Scene 2. He would have been much, much younger than Macbeth. "The devil himself could not pronounce a title more hateful to mine ear, nor more fearful. Thou liest, abhorred tyrant. With my sword I'll prove the lie thou speakest." They fight, and the young Siward is slain. "Thou was born of woman, but swords I smile at, weapons laugh to scorn, brandished by a man that's of a woman born." So Macbeth here is showing that he's so sure of the witch's prophecy, he almost sounds a little bit mad. Everyone should be fearful of being attacked with a sword and a weapon. So it's showing he just has full faith in the witch's prophecy still. Alarms, enter Macduff. So by this stage, Macbeth has exited the stage and Macduff comes on. "That way the noise is, tyrant, show thy face. If thou be'st slain with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt me still. I cannot strike at wretched kerns whose arms are hard to bear with their staves. Either thou, Macbeth, or else my sword with an unbattered edge I seethe again undeeded. There thou shalt be. By this great clatter one of the greatest notes seems bruited. Let me find him, fortune, and more I beg not." So Macduff is basically fighting to avenge the death of his wife and children. He's also fighting for the rightful king. He wants only to kill Macbeth. He doesn't want to kill other soldiers just for the sake of it. These wretched kerns he talks about are a reference to peasant soldiers, those who have no choice, who have to bear their staves being their spears. So he doesn't want to kill them because he knows this is not their fight, this is not their fault. He only wants to kill Macbeth, and if he cannot kill Macbeth, he will not kill at all. His unbattered edge of his sword he will put away. This kind of shows Macduff as a better man than Macbeth, because Macduff isn't prepared to kill innocent people, whereas Macbeth was prepared to kill unarmed women and children in their homes. So here when it says by this great clatter being a noise, one of great note of importance. seems bruited, seems announced. So there was a great noise, so that must have something to do with Macbeth. He is going to find him, and he's asking fortune, he's asking fate to let this be his fate, to kill Macbeth. So he exits, and at which point Malcolm and Siward come in, remembering that Siward's son's just been killed. This way, my lord, the castle's gently rendered. The tyrant's people on both sides do fight. The noble thanes do bravely in the war. The day almost itself professes yours, and little is to do. So when he says it's gently rendered, he means gently surrendered. So the big battle that they were anticipating never really eventuates. The soldiers of Macbeth have switched sides to Malcolm, so there isn't much left to do to win. So the battle is almost giving itself to Malcolm. Malcolm says, "We have met with foes that strike beside us." So Macbeth's soldiers strike without actually really wanting to hurt the king's army. And it links back to Act 5, Scene 4, where he says, "None serve with him but constrained things whose hearts are absent too." So even in battle, the soldiers are turning against Macbeth. Siward says, "Enter, sir, the castle," and they exit the stage. So have a read of this summary of scene 8. Even when Macbeth has run out of protective prophecies and knows he's likely to be beaten, he refuses to yield to Macduff. He is, in some senses, the same relentless opponent that he showed himself to be in reports from Act 1, when it seemed like Norway had won the battle against Scotland, but now his efforts are in the service of nothing. His fruitless crown is signifying nothing. And also the traitor MacDowd, who's killed by Macbeth, has had his head displayed on a post for everyone else to see. And we see at the end of this scene that that's exactly what happens to Macbeth. So again, this kind of cyclical nature. So during this exchange with Macbeth, Macduff appears less emotional than Macbeth. He indicates that revenge is best served by actions rather than words, whereas Macbeth is wanting to I guess, scare him off through his words that he cannot be beat. So throughout the play, Macbeth has wondered about the truthfulness of the witch's words. In Act 1, Scene 3, he calls them imperfect speakers because they had not told him all that he wanted to know. And now he realizes that they spoke to him of his own imperfections. In that same scene, he admitted that their supernatural prophecy cannot be ill, cannot be good. And now he knows which was which. So in Act 4, Scene 1, his opinion was that men were damned that trust them, and now he himself is damned by his own words. And in Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth spoke about his doubt concerning the predictions of the fiend that lies like truth. But now there is no such doubt. He says, "Be these juggling fiends no more believe that palter with us in double sense." So he knows that they can no longer be believed. Okay, Act 5, Scene 8 opens in another part of the battlefield. Enter Macbeth. "Why should I play the Roman fool and die on my own sword, whiles I see lives, the gashes do better upon them?" So the reference to the Roman fool refers to the ancient Roman practice of suicide to preserve your honour. Suicide was seen as more noble than surrender, and most famously it was done by Brutus and Mark Antony. And I want you just to notice the assonance here. I, die, mine, whiles, lives. It kind of adds a sharpness, and that emphasis on the I really emphasizes his selfishness. At this point, enter Macduff. So this is the penultimate scene, and this is the climax where the two meet. "Turn, hellhound, turn." Again shows Macduff as a noble character. He refuses to stab Macbeth in the back. He wants to see him face to face. Now the reference to hellhound is also known. Hellhounds were a creature that were also known as bearers of death. They were a supernatural dog. They were said to have glowing eyes and black fur, and they were considered to be the guardians of the entrance to the world of the dead. So again, we see lots of kind of demonic references to Macbeth. "Of all men else I have avoided thee, But get thee back, my soul is too much charged with the blood of thine already. So too much charge meaning is burdened with too much of your blood, of your family's blood already. So Macbeth is in some ways showing guilt for killing Macduff's family. It increases the audience sympathy for him, which is important. You know, we pity the fact that he's had to carry this guilt and that he regrets that kind of what he's done, because he refuses and he's trying to avoid Macduff. But Macduff responds with, I have no words. My voice is in my sword. Thou bloodier villain than terms can give thee out. So Macduff's lack of faith in words is in stark contrast to Macbeth, who has spent the whole of the play bewitched by the words of the witches or the arguments of his wife. So they fight. Macbeth says, Thou losest labour, as easy mayest thou the entrenched air with thy keen sword impress, as make me bleed. Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests. I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. So when he says thou losest labour, he's saying you're wasting your energy. You might as well cut the uncuttable air. You cannot draw blood from me. So he says, I bear a charmed life. So charm here could be interpreted as good, as in lucky and blessed, but also as in bad, because his life has been messed with by the witches. He's under their charm, under their spell. Macduff says, Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. So when he says the angel, he's talking about the evil angel Lucifer, the devil. And when he says from his mother's womb untimely ripped, he is talking about being born through a caesarean section, so not actually birthed through the normal means. Macbeth. Accursed be that tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowered my better part of man, and be these juggling fiends no more believed that palter with us in their double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope. I'll not fight with thee. So coward to my better part of man means intimidated my manly spirit. You've made me into a kind of scared person. The juggling fiends, he's talking about trickery, fiends being the witches and working for the devil. Palter just means to mumble or to babble in double sense. So this kind of juxtaposition here of keeping and breaking promises. So the kind of juxtaposition of the promise, which is a certainty, and his hope, which is uncertain. He's just hoping for the best. So that reflects that double sense. So keep and break, and promise and hope are double. They're juxtaposed. Macduff says, so Macbeth finishes with I'll not fight, and Macduff says, then yield thee, coward, and live to be the show and gaze of the time. We'll have thee, as our rarer monsters are, painted upon a pole, and under it, here you may see the tyrant. So what Macduff is saying is, we'll have your picture painted on a board and carried on a pole, as is done to advertise a monster in like a freak show. So you will be humiliated. And because of that winds Macbeth up, and he says, I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet, and to be baited with the rabble's curse. Though Birnam would be come to Dunsinane, and thou opposed, being of no woman born, yet I will try the last. Before my body I throw my warlike shield. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that cries, hold, enough. So here we see Macbeth saying that he is now willing to fight, even though the prophecies have come true. He is not going to go out without a fight. He says to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. Again, this is an insult to his manliness. The rabble's curse means he's not going to be embarrassed by mere commoners. He's not going to allow them to shout and taunt him. Again, that's part of his pride. And try the last means he's willing to fight to the death. So they exit fighting. And they come back and they're fighting, and Macbeth is actually slain on stage, so people actually see the death of Macbeth, and at that point Macduff carries Macbeth's body off stage or drags it off stage. Okay, I'd like you to read through this slide and really think about how is the audience supposed to be feeling in this last scene where we see Malcolm finally crowned the King of Scotland. Okay, Act 5, Scene 9, the final scene. We're within the castle. There's a retreat and flourish. A retreat was just a technical phrase for a bugle that sounded at the end of a fight. Enter Malcolm, Siward, Ross, the thanes and soldiers, some bearing colours, with a drummer. Malcolm says, I would the friends we miss were safe arrived. So he's basically saying, I wish those soldiers who were unaccounted for would safely arrive. Siward says, some must go off, and yet by these I see so great a day as this is cheaply bought. So Siward says, well, look, the reality is some people must die, but looking around me, I can see that we've won this great victory at quite a small cost. There aren't that many people who have died. Malcolm says, Macduff is missing, and your noble son. Then Ross says to Siward, your son, my lord, has paid a soldier's debt. He only lived but till he was a man, which no sooner had his prowess confirmed in the unshrinking station where he fought, but like a man he died. So Ross is basically saying even though he was so young, he fought so bravely and he fought without shrinking to fear, so he died like a man. Siward says, then he is dead? Aye, and brought off the field. Your cause for sorrow must not be measured by his worth, for then it hath no end. So Ross says, the reason for your grief, the passing of your son, cannot continue just because he was such a worthy son, or you'll never stop grieving. Siward says, had he hurts before, which means were his wound on the front of his body, because if they were on the back, he might assume that maybe his son was running away, but because they're on the front, he died facing the fight, which brings Siward some comfort that he died a noble death. Aye, on the front. Why then, God's soldier be he. Had I as many sons as I have hairs, I would not wish them to a fairer death. And so his knell is knolled. So he's saying there, even if I had as many sons as I've got hairs on my head, I couldn't wish for a more noble and honourable death. So he accepts his death without grief. So Malcolm says, he's worth more sorrow, and that I'll spend for him. Malcolm says, I'm not going to let you just ignore your grief and the fact that, we should be grieving over this boy. And here it shows that Malcolm is a really caring and gentle king. He's willing to grieve the death of his servants, even if he died fighting in an honourable way, which suggests that Malcolm will be a good king, just like his father was. And you can compare that to Macbeth's reaction to death. So Siward says, he's worth no more. They say he parted well and paid his score, and so God be with him. Here comes newer comfort. So he's worth no more. Now, Siward isn't disrespecting his son. He's simply saying that there is no more worthy a death that you can suffer than a soldier who dies in his duty, which goes to this idea that he paid his score. He did his duty to his king. The newer comfort means he can see Macduff coming in bearing Macbeth's head on a pole. Now, according to the Hollingshead Chronicles, the real Macbeth's head was placed on a pike, and in Shakespeare's own time, traitors' heads were placed on pikes and mounted over the south entrance of the London Bridge, which was very near to Shakespeare's Globe. Macduff says to Malcolm, Hail, King, for so thou art. Behold where stands the usurper's cursed head. The time is free. I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl. That speak my salutation in their minds, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail, King of Scotland. So the reference to the time is free, meaning that now that Macbeth's dead, they're free from the terror that he inspired. The compassed with thy kingdom's pearl means that he's surrounded by the kingdom's most noble men. And that last bit is he's just basically saying everyone's thinking the same as I, and I want us all to say together, Hail, King of Scotland. To which they all do. Hail, King of Scotland, there is a flourish. So you'd have trumpets or something. Malcolm says, we shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with your several loves, and make us even with you. My thanes and kingsmen henceforth be earls, the first that ever Scotland in such an honour named. What's more to do, which would be planted newly with the time, is calling home our exiled friends abroad, that fled the snares of watchful tyranny, producing forth the cruel ministers of this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who it is thought by self and violent hands took off her life. This, and what needful else that calls upon us by the grace of grace, we will perform in measure, time, and place. So thanks to all at once, and to each one whom we invite to see us crowned at Scone. So, he's basically saying here, before we reckon with our several loves, so, we won't spend a long time before we pay you back all the love and service that you have shown to us, which shows Malcolm is a very kind and benevolent king. He wants to reward those people for their loyalty. Henceforth be earls. Now a thane was a servant of the king. He could be given a title, which would essentially make him just a wealthy landowner. But an earl was something much higher. It was a member of nobility. It was more powerful than a thane. They were like rulers of a territory in which a thane might own some land in. An earl also was an English title. It wasn't one that was used in Scotland. So again, bringing together the idea of English and Scotland being one. So what's more to do, which would be planted newly with the time. So here, this idea of being planted newly, if you can remember, Malcolm here uses very similar kind of plant imagery to what Duncan used in Act 1, Scene 4, when he says to Macbeth, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to making thee full of growing. Again showing that Malcolm will be very similar to his father. He will be the kind of king his father was, and we know that Duncan was a very good and very much loved king. So, as calling home our exiled friends abroad, so he means such as, these are the things that we need to do, such as calling people home that had fled Scotland, like his brother. So that's the first thing they're going to do. The next thing they're going to do is producing forth the cruel ministers. So the people who carried out Macbeth's orders, like the murderers who killed Banquo and Macduff's family, will be brought to trial. And he refers to Macbeth as a dead butcher. So the play Macbeth was written after another one of Shakespeare's plays, Julius Caesar, where there is a very clear distinction between butchery and beneficial sacrifice. And those watching Macbeth probably would have seen the play Julius Caesar, in which there is a character Brutus, and he says, let's be sacrificers, but not butchers. Let's carve him as a dish fit for the gods, not hew him as a carcass fit for hounds. So it kind of allows Brutus to still be seen as honourable when he acknowledges the kind of need to cleanse and heal the country by regicide, by killing a king. And here Macbeth is the opposite. His regicide of Duncan was not honourable, but Malcolm's killing of Macbeth as king is honourable. So there is that very clear distinction between just butchery and then killing for honour. So Macbeth at the beginning was described as brave Macbeth, and now at the end of this play he's described just as a dead butcher. So a butcher being someone that kills without a conscience. So that clear distinction being made between kind of bravery and sacrificial murder in the good of the whole country, and then just the Macbeth style of ruthless murder. The idea of Lady Macbeth as a fiend-like queen. A fiend was someone who has an evil spirit, a person who's cruel and brutal or spiteful. But I want you to think about, really, is she that one-dimensional? What about the fact that she's protective of her husband, she's supportive of her husband, she tries to comfort him sometimes? So think about those other interpretations. And when he says here that calls upon us by the grace of grace, he's saying that things will be done in accordance with what God would want. Again, reminding people of that divine right of kings. We will perform in measure, time and place. So here we have a real restoration of order. There was chaos while Macbeth was king, and now that Malcolm is rightfully put on the throne, things will be done in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. So in the end, he thanks to one and all, meaning also to the audience and to each one who we invite to see us crowned at Scone. So back in Shakespeare's day, one and Scone would have rhymed. But also, it's the idea, it's that kind of fairy tale ending that they will live happily ever after because Malcolm is now on the throne. Okay, your task for today is to create a timeline for Macbeth, similar to the one that you created for Lady Macbeth. I really want you to see his transformation from the brave Macbeth to the dead butcher. So follow the bullet points and don't forget to email me your work when you're done. Thank you. See you next time.